Welcome to the Westside Barbell podcast. Today's episode, I am with my co-host, Burley Hawk. Burley, always a pleasure to have you in.
Good to be here, Tom.
The last few videos we put out, overwhelmingly, the biggest questions we have got is, it's all well and good using the conjugate method for athletes, for powerlifters, for people who have experience. But what about the people who've just started? What about the general lifter, the beginner lifter, or the lifter who've never heard of it? So we said we dedicated a good chunk of this podcast to tackling this topic. And I know, Burley, you have covered this in your Starting Conjugate series. And I think from that level, we can direct people to the right blogs and articles.
And the base building series. Base building is for people that have never trained really at all with the barbell, and then Starting Conjugates more or less for people that maybe have 3 months in and want to convert to the conjugate method. Or even, 3 or 10 years in, it's just an easy way to get started with the conjugate method.
So if I was new to this, how would you explain to me what the conjugate method is?
Well, it's multiple strength training methodologies put into one method. It's the antithesis of linear periodization. We address all necessary sports strengths and trait qualities, athletic trait qualities, week to week, month to month, year to year. I think the biggest advantage of our training style versus other training styles is the lack of detraining that occurs during our training. The strengths and the athletic traits that an athlete gains in our training, they generally retain. And it's a lot easier to incorporate than a lot of folks will make it seem. And I'm not saying this to act like we're the only people that know anything about this, but Westside Barbell and Louis is by far the most accomplished field researcher when it comes to the conjugate method. So the way we run it, the way he taught us to run it, is the best way, and it's a lot easier than most folks would understand, especially if you, like with the Conjugate Club. And I'm not saying that just to sell it. The Conjugate Club is an easy way for folks to get a program that's going to work, and all you really have to do is just make sure you're executing the movements correctly. Other than that, just follow the program and it'll work. And then a lot of times, if you couple the Conjugate Club with some of the literature that we have for sale under the books, you can learn as you go. I think a lot of people get overwhelmed because they think before they can start conjugate, they have to have this incredible amount of knowledge, when really all you have to do is have a pretty well-written program and a basic understanding of exercise execution, and you can get rolling. And for beginners, the methodology can be watered down tremendously and very simplistic. It doesn't, a lot of people get wrapped up in variation, whether it's a lot of variation or the extent of a variation, bands, chains, specialty bars. When you're a beginner, you have the luxury of really benefiting from the bare minimum. So it's less variation. It's more focused on the basic movements, and you can get a lot out of that for 1 to 2 to 3 years. When you see the variations we're using in the gym, whether it's a video or a picture, the athlete got to that point after years and years of training, and that variation becomes relevant because it delivers the stimulus they need to improve. With a beginner, the baseline stimulus will elicit improvement. So I think that people get overwhelmed and they kind of psych themselves out of using the conjugate method before they even get started.
There's definitely a lot of literature and different people's interpretations out there that does confuse people.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if I'm trying to put it as simply as possible, you're getting into a system of training that on a weekly basis tells you how strong you are, how fast you are, what areas are weak, and what you need to do to improve.
Yeah.
Then from there, when you're setting up a beginner's program, the start of it really is you're trying to accumulate data, starting points.
Mm-hmm.
If you're completely new to this, and depending on your strength level, you're going to omit some of the stuff from the main program. And conjugate is based on max effort, the max effort method, dynamic effort method, and the repeated effort method. So max effort is for maximal strength, how strong you are. Dynamic effort is how fast you can move a particular weight, and the repeated effort method is in relation to accessories, to where you're doing multiple sets and reps to decrease a weakness, increase a strength. When you first start with this, and back to your base building series of blogs, is that if you're completely new to lifting, completely new to this, dynamic effort really is not going to do much for you because you don't have that element of maximal strength.
Yeah. And then the velocity targets introduce the chance that an athlete can hurt themselves, because if an athlete's not proficient, or like I said before in the last podcast, Absolute strength drives technique. You cannot practice technique and get better at just technique unless you're enhancing absolute strength. So an athlete that's new to training within even the first year, there's going to be issues with their execution because they're lacking in growing absolute strength. So if you right off the bat introduce dynamic effort training, you're giving the athlete a velocity requirement that they're probably not going to be able to meet. So it's going to be repeated effort work anyway. And then if they're consciously trying to move faster, there's a really good chance that they're going to either have bad habits or just simply get injured.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you
I'm
sure
with
you'd
you
agree?
to where when you start lifting weights in general, your first few weeks or months should be dedicated to learning technique. Back to you shouldn't be doing box squats right now. All you should be doing is learning how to squat, how to bench, and how to deadlift.
Yep.
All the different variations from using a straight bar. Don't worry about chains. Don't worry about bands. Actually get comfortable lifting weights correctly. And when you introduce the maximum effort aspect, usually you can't tap into your true max effort because you don't know how to put out exertion yet.
Yes, and the lack of intramuscular coordination.
So that's where, at the start, there's so much freedom and so much stuff to choose from. Just reel it back in, and we want to focus on, okay, we need to get some data points. So if we just need a starting number for your bench, squat, and deadlift. Once we have that, now we can actually introduce goal setting. So just say you start off, you can squat 225. Well, our goal is we want to get 230. So now we can goal set for maximum effort. That helps with repeated effort because hopefully during you lifting that, and there's plenty of ways to where you can share videos to get follow-ups on what you need to improve upon. But now we can select accessory exercises to improve that weakness and to get you to a point where you have enough maximum strength and enough competency in technique and you have enough GPP to actually train that you can introduce dynamic effort.
Yep. And I think a lot of people get tripped out on using the max effort method for people that are new to training. And really, when you're dealing with a beginner, a lot of their training is max effort in their body's interpretation of the training. So with max effort in a beginner, we simply take the athlete to a point to where form slightly breaks down. We know that if they continue on with another set, form's only going to further break down. And then once the slight breakdown in form occurs, we shut the exercise down. And the reason we got to reach those levels of intensity is because that's motor unit recruitment that's going to result in an accelerated gain of absolute strength. You can, of course, gain absolute strength using repeated effort method, but not at the same rate that you can if you know how to properly institute the max effort method with a beginner. Is it recommended for every coach to do? Maybe not. Not every coach is probably has the eye to watch a max effort training session and understand the right time with a new lifter when to shut the exercise down. But if you know how to do that, the absolute strength gains that the max effort method can supply a beginner lifter in a short amount of time is infinitely beneficial. You could gain 6 months of strength in the repeated effort. You could do it in 3 months' time if you use max effort and repeated effort. It really accelerates the rate of gain.
You bring up a good point too. When you're starting off, you don't have the luxury of being able to strain or be able to take gambles with your technique.
No.
Because you're used to this. So being able to shut things off when technique breaks down, for sure you should do that at the start because you don't have enough competency to pull on different muscle groups or body parts to actually get the lift up. At the start, it doesn't matter. You're trying to get a number. It's like when Louis used to get asked a question from people doing their first meet. Hey, I want to take this jump. What should I do? He's like, just go get a number.
Yeah.
It's your first meet. This is you starting this. Get a number. Even if you're saving 20 pounds, this system is for life. So eventually you're going to surpass that and keep goal setting. So don't overanalyze. If your form breaks down, stop it. Take that as your PR, even though you think you can exert more, and just grow from there. Because this is going to go on for months and months and months to where every week you should be hitting a PR in some variation.
Well, the entire point of the max effort method is to improve absolute strength via motor unit recruitment and just to reach a specific a specific intensity level. So you don't have to set a PR every session. As long as you're lifting above 90%, 1 to 3 reps above 90%, you're going to improve absolute strength at a higher rate than you would if you just did the repeated effort method day by day by day.
So if I was going to set up a beginner's program, how should a complete newcomer to this set up their first conjugate method program?
2 max effort. Well, you can do 2 max effort days a week and 2 repeated effort days a week, or you could just do 1 max effort day per week and 3 repeated effort days per week and just alternate the upper body, lower body. I would just do 2 and 2. I'd do 2 max effort, 2 repeated effort. And then, people complain about the lack of volume that a beginner can accrue during a max effort main movement because, they're not that strong. So if they're maxing out at 135, people think like, well, shit, we start with the bar, then we go to 135 and we're done. Well, no. You can start with 5s on the bar, you go to 10-5, you can take small jumps up to where you can still get 5 or 6 sets in before you reach that 90 to, max threshold. So you can still get training volume there and then move on to the repeated effort, the accessory training. And when you're dealing with a beginner, the accessory training will drive the volume. We're not so much worried about the volume. We're focused on intensity with the max effort training. We'll make up the training volume in the accessory training. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah. If I came to you and I'm new to this, what's my first day going to look like? What's the first day's goal?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, I think that for the first 3 weeks, it's more of like an in-doc, to where I wouldn't start with the max efforts and the repeated efforts right off the bat. The first 3 weeks, it would be more repeated effort work, but it would ultimately be focused on just the basic mechanics of the lifts. I don't think it's a great idea to start day 1 off with the max effort, but by the 3rd or 4th week, athletes should have, or newcomers should have, a competency level to execute a squat, a bench, and a deadlift to a degree that is acceptable to move on to higher intensity training. You see it anyways. When they're using the repeated effort, these athletes have form breakdowns that ultimately a lot of times becomes max effort when you work with beginners, right? Because they get tired, and then you might have a 5-rep set planned, and then they can only do 1 or 2. Well, really, that 1 or 2 was a max effort set. So our system, to start with it, we're just planning that. We're just going to drive towards that instead of it just happening by accident. But yeah, the first 3 weeks, learn how to properly squat, how to properly bench, how to properly deadlift. And I think that guys spend so much time trying to work on technique, thinking that you can practice technique to be better at technique, when really strength drives technique. So you need to get the athlete stronger. And the squat, bench, and deadlift, and if you want to put the press in there too, the overhead press, they're very basic movements. It should not take that long for a halfway athletic individual to be competent enough to start adding some weight to the barbell and squatting, benching, or deadlifting.
How do you know if someone's competent at doing the lift?
I would say that well, it all depends on their starting strength level. I mean, if you're dealing with somebody that's naturally a weaker person, it would just start with the barbell, right? And if they can just move the barbell properly and move the barbell with some 5s on it properly, you're good to go. If you start with an athlete that comes off the street, and as a coach, you can say, well, this guy, as strong as he is, he probably could start with a 315 squat today. Maybe you work up to 135 and just get some practice reps in there. And that's the thing. The first 3 weeks is mostly just practice. I wouldn't even apply a method to it. It's just an in-doc. It's a practice to get used to the basic movements that will be experienced. Maybe it takes an athlete 6 weeks at the most, but in my experience, I've worked with complete beginners in the past, and it takes about 3 weeks for them to get the hang of things. And usually after that 3-week period, the athlete wants to move on and start challenging themselves anyways, because practicing the basic movements it's not fun. It gets pretty freaking boring pretty quick.
And this is within the base building blogs you have out, right? You have...
Yeah, the base building blogs I have out, I discussed how to introduce max effort and then how to move on to the full max effort, repeated effort training week. Yep.
So what considerations should be made regarding exercise selection? So you've got past the point of we're now competent in technique, and on that I will say the importance of training partners or recording your movements. Yep. There's plenty of places out there, again, not to plug it, but we have it within the Conjugate Club. You can upload your exercises, we can give you feedback.
Yep.
Or find a group, find a community, or even better, get training partners around you to where multiple eyes are usually better than one.
Yep.
You've got past that few weeks of getting down the technique, and maybe you're doing a little bit of GPP along the way. Now you're ready to start. Mm-hmm. What considerations should you make regarding exercise selection, starting with the main movement and the accessories?
Keep it basic. Get the most out of the least. We want to get the most, we want the greatest adaptation out of the least amount of variation. Because ultimately, movement variations are tools in the toolbox. And if we're not building an athlete to be the world's strongest man, well, we need to only use the tools necessary to take them to that next level.
Yep.
You don't have to, your first week of max effort training does not need to be a giant cambered bar versus bands. It should just be a normal back squat. Then the next week could be just a deadlift. And you could alternate deadlift and squat for a year or two and make plenty of gains without even adding accommodating resistance, without adding in a deficit, without adding in a box squat. Like people underestimate the amount of adaptation you can gain off of basic variations in the first couple of years of training.
How can a new person balance different type of efforts in their weekly routine?
You say balance the multiple efforts?
Balance that with recovery, with everything else.
Well, what you were talking about GPP, I think the biggest driver of that is your conditioning level. So obviously, if you want to recover better, you need to be in better condition. So outside of, this is always within the program, but outside of the main lift and the accessory lift, you always need to be incorporating some sort of cardiovascular exercise, whether it's, sled work at, decent yardage at a decent pace. Could be uphill treadmill, walks. It could be a salt bike for 15 minutes. It could be a rower. But just do things to enhance your cardiovascular capabilities, because the better health you're in, the better cardiovascular health you're in, the better you'll recover, and the better your training will be. And not only that, having a high capacity of cardiovascular output allows you to the ability to become less fatigued during the workouts, right? Of course, there's going to be muscular fatigue, but a lot of guys just get winded. They get tired, especially during accessory work. The main work, everybody comes in with a bunch of energy drinks and all that shit. They're ready to go for that. But after that, a lot of guys lose steam rolling into the accessory work, and they're not getting the type of adaptation that they could be getting out of their accessory work, because they just don't have the gas tank to push through a full battery of accessories at the optimal levels of intensity that they should be training their accessory work at.
So for a beginner, to bring us up to this point, you start with at least 3 weeks of learning the technique with just a squat, bench, and deadlifts and overhead variation.
Just practice, yeah. It's
practicing
practice.
That, and then choose a weight, or maybe just choose a bar to where the weight is not going to inhibit the practice technique. Find training partners, find a community to upload or to get feedback on if your technique is correct. From there, once we have a competency level understood in basic technique, we're going to move on to a structure of 2 max effort days and 2 repeated effort days.
Yeah.
And then from there comes the kind of the next question is selection of how do you know which exercises to select. Then you came with to where we keep it basic.
Yeah.
Keep everything basic, chains, bands, everything, wait for a while. Stick with this compound movements, get the very most from the very least.
Yep.
And once we get through this phase, and this could be anywhere from 2 months up to 12 months, depending on the person.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is accessory selection. How do we know when to push the weights up?
Well, I think you should always be trying to push your weights up every session. When I work with anybody, whether it's somebody that's new or somebody that's very experienced, I always, because accessory work is always performed pre-fatigue. So to assign exact training weights is difficult. I always say use the heaviest weight you can use as long as you're adhering to proper technique and you're not breaking technique throughout the set.
Yep.
So if you have, say if I'm doing standing overhead press with dumbbells as an accessory exercise, maybe I start with 90s for a set of 10, easy. Move on to 100, easy. Move on to 110s, a little bit of a struggle. Say if it's a 4 set, then the next set I'll just stay with the 110s. But you need to push accessories week to week, because that's where your greatest amount of gains will occur. It's the driver of training volume, and you want that training volume to be trained at adequate intensities. It's not going to be max effort intensity, of course, but it needs to be the greatest amount of intensity you can push based on the current available energy levels.
To determine the accessory exercises, we're getting feedback from the main movement. So depending on where you break down that main movement, that's going to give you the feedback to go, okay, I may have missed it due to a weak upper back or to weak triceps. Depending on that, again, this is where feedback and asking people questions come into play. The biggest problem I see with accessory exercises is people don't keep record of what they're lifting.
Yeah.
And when you first start out, it doesn't matter how low it is. Because day one, just say you do 40s easy, 50s easy, 60s easy, 70s easy. You're like, oh, the next day, I'm going to start in 70s.
Yeah.
To where now you're getting this feedback of like, here's my starting weights. And another question, and I'll ask you this as a coach, your last 2 reps, do you want them to be a struggle? Or do you care if we're going for, just say, 10 reps, when it comes to set 8, 9, and 10, that you're okay with them failing on 9 or 10? Or do you want them to strain through it?
I mean, I guess it would all depend on the situation, but really, if it's say if it's a 4 sets of 10, the 3 sets of 10 should be completed perfectly. Well, not perfectly, I mean, but to standard.
Yeah.
And then the fourth set, if the 8, 9, and 10, maybe if you fail on 10, that's acceptable. As long as the failure is not putting you at risk of injury. You don't want to be pushing the intensity so much that your form's completely breaking down. But other than that, yeah, I mean, you want to push your accessories. You'll gain more pushing your accessories than you would ever just getting the reps done is not enough. There has to be the proper amount of intensity behind the accessory work. Otherwise, you're wasting time and you're kind of going through the motions. And it becomes real easy to choose. Guys are tired, so they think, well, I'll just choose the easier weight today.
Yeah.
You're wasting your time. Push your accessories every session, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced lifter. Everybody should be pushing their accessories anytime you train accessories.
And everything should be lift with maximal intent. You shouldn't be going through the motions. And it is repetition to near failure, not repetition to failure, to near failure.
Yep.
So that's where, when we are looking at our athletes executing their accessories, which is 80% of the workout, so that's how important it is, that rep 9 and 10, it should not be a cakewalk. There should be some amount of strain. And I'm with you to where sets 1 and 2, to where it's building up, but sets 3 and 4 to me are the most important ones.
Yeah.
And you should be struggling towards the end, to where now you're actually pushing yourself, because that's going to help. We know really jack shit about the central nervous system. Like it's still, people are still trying to decipher it. But from our point of view, we're trying to stimulate it. And the only way you can stimulate it is with maximal weights or to struggling, right? Or to near failure weights, because then that's where you're recruiting absolutely everything to execute. And that's where you have the point of failure of, okay, if technique fails, you stop, or you have failure of the complete lift. What I'm trying to get across is, don't take this for granted. Don't take accessory work to where you just do them just to go through the motions. And don't be sloppy on technique, because we have it here to where people come in, they'll do tricep extensions, and they're blasting out 100s. And you're like, your technique's all wrong. You just adjust the angle of the elbow. Now they drop down from 100 to 50 pounds.
Yeah.
And then at the start, your ego should be outside the door.
Yeah.
Because if not, it's going to progressively get worse and worse and worse. And you'll hit a stalling point, and you'll blame the system, you'll blame the coach, you'll blame your training partners, everyone else but your technique.
Well, like towards the technique end, not that we're trying to be bodybuilders, but we want the exercise to target we want the exercise to stimulate the target muscle or the muscle group. So if you're not performing the lifts to standard, you're essentially defeating the point of the chosen exercise. So if you're doing your a lateral raise, you need to be targeting the deltoids. If you're doing a tricep exercise, it should be mostly triceps. You don't want to be leaning into it to where it's posterior shoulder, or you're using your stomach and leaning into it, all that type of shit. More like with the dumbbell extensions, like you said, a lot of guys will cheat the positioning to make it easier, achieve easier elbow extension. Just make sure if it's a tricep exercise, you're feeling it in your triceps. If it's a bicep exercise, you're feeling it in your biceps. If it's a row exercise, you're feeling it in your mid and upper back. That's important too, to make sure you're getting the greatest amount of adaptation and training effect.
When it comes to getting the most out of the exercise, to me, it's silly for some people to overlook talking to a bodybuilder. If I want to learn about boxing, I'll go to a boxer. If I want to learn about jiu-jitsu, I'll go to a jiu-jitsu specialist or an expert. If I want to know how to target muscles correctly using exercise, I will go to a bodybuilder. They know the body inside out. They can contract parts of their body. I have no idea how they do it, but they're experts in that. And learning from them is equally as important as learning from everyone else. You should never shut down a demographic because you mightn't understand their sport. When it comes to understanding the way to actually how to build muscle and contract, there's no better demographic.
I would say, Westside is the master of strength training, but there's great bodybuilders out there that are the masters of hypertrophy training. Like they know exactly how to grow a muscle, and how to specifically target muscle groups and individual muscles.
We're going through our max efforts, then repeated effort methods. We have our accessories. I guess the next point is, how do we know when to switch up accessories or to increase intensities? We kind of touch upon it, but to answer that question, when do you switch exercises?
Well, I mean, with beginners, it doesn't have to be as frequent. I mean, you can squat, deadlift for a few months. And then it could be as simple as, okay, now instead of a back squat, we move on to a front squat variation. instead of a conventional deadlift, we move on to a sumo deadlift variation, because at that point there's going to be no bias for a beginner. They don't know if they're a better conventional or sumo puller, and really they need both. I mean, every athlete needs to incorporate both styles of pull, but particularly beginners. So it's small changes like that. Or on the bench press, instead of, you can start with flat, close, then you can go flat, close, incline, overhead press. But just keep the movements basic. You want to broaden your horizons, of course, and become as proficient in the many squats, the many deadlifts, the many presses that the many basic movements that there are. But for the first 2-3 months, you don't have to worry about it. Maybe in months 3, 4, 5, and 6, you start to change things up a bit. Really, the greatest marker of when to change things up is just when you start to realize that you're not improving at the same rate as before. Yep. And even a beginner can realize that. And especially if you're keeping a log, you can start to see that you're not growing the way your training weights aren't increasing the way they once were.
And that's a good point, because you will go from making huge jumps and huge PRs to very small. And like here, we're always fighting for 5-pound PRs consistently. But that is a good point to where, to understand once that's the max effort has always been the North Star if our accessory exercises are working.
Yep.
Because if they're not going up, you either have to change something within the accessory, intensity, exercises, volume, etc., or you have to introduce new max effort compound movements.
Yep. And then real quick, I want to say about like fatigue. For a beginner, look at because in the traditional conjugate system, we use the dynamic effort method as like the North Star for fatigue. Mm-hmm. Once we start to realize on Fridays or Saturdays that an athlete can't meet the specific velocity parameters associated with dynamic effort training, we then at that point can understand that they're excessively fatigued. With beginners, it would be in the repeated effort work, and particularly in the accessory work, when you start to realize that even though you might be doing all the cardiovascular training you need to be doing, you're in good shape, but you're not achieving the training weights or achieving all the sets that you should be during your accessory training, that's a great sign as a beginner that you're excessively fatigued. Yep. And then the simple way to solve that is just for a couple days or maybe even a week, lower the accessory volume, make sure you're getting your sleep, your hydration, your nutrition right, and then within a week's time you'll bounce right back.
How long does someone stay within this framework of beginners?
First year at least. But I mean, guys are so quick to want to jump to the next level. Get the most out of each level that you can. I mean, if you can run a basic program for 2 or 3 years and make significant gains, keep doing that. Yep. Change the program up when you need to. Don't change the program up just because you want to. Like I said, when you see videos and pictures out of Westside Barbell, you're looking at guys that have 15, 20, 25 years of training experience. So of course the variations are going to be more specific to the individual, and they're also specific to the goal. Like some of these guys, trying to squat 1,200 pounds. If you're just trying to go from a 250 to 300 pound squat, you don't have to break out every tool in the toolbox to do so. Just get the work in, do the basics, stick to the basics, be dedicated, and the strength and the muscle growth will happen.
Keeping data is hugely important.
Yep.
Tracking all your lifts and all your exercises. And back down to the accessory exercises are so important to development. And this is tips from Lou to where don't keep the ones you're good at. It's very easy to go, I'm really, really good at this and I enjoy doing this. I'm not saying forget it, but you want to find the ones you're really bad at and you can actually lift the least amount of weight to get the most out of it is hugely important. And then another thing, don't fall into a trap that your hamstrings are getting weak or your triceps getting weak depending on the exercise. For instance, we rotate between an inverse curl to a standing leg curl to maybe a lying leg curl, we'll have different hamstring specific exercises. When you go from one to the other, you're weaker on that lift, but your hamstrings have not got weaker.
Yeah.
They're just not used to that stimulus. The max efforts is always your guiding star. If they're going down, yes, something's going wrong.
Yeah.
But don't be worried if you go from a strict tricep extension to a Williams press, that you do Williams press, you can only do 10 pounds and you're doing 40 pounds on that. It doesn't mean your triceps have gone backwards. It means the stimulus or you're not used to that exercise.
Well, a good example of that would be you have a deadlifter that is maybe great at Romanian deadlifts, but then they go do, the glute ham machine and they need all the plates in the world to be able to do it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that their hamstrings are weak. It means that they're just bad at that particular exercise. Yeah. And really, I mean, we seek to find that. We want to find that exercise because that's the exercise that ultimately will drive. Once that guy gets better at the the glute ham machine, he's going to ultimately do, perform better in the deadlift, better with the Romanian deadlift. All the deadlift exercise will improve. So we do seek to find weakness, and like you said, just because a particular exercise is weak doesn't mean that the muscle group's weak. It just means that it's challenged at that particular exercise at this time.
And the difference between an athlete with basically they got high training age to where they're used to training, and we will rotate exercises if they're introvert or extrovert in a high training age, usually every 3 weeks. But when you're a beginner, get the absolute most, like you said, out of it. So if you're doing a tricep extension and you're making progress, get as much progress as you can out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you might stick with that with 8 weeks. You don't know. But like to where use the max effort, get that feedback mechanism in, and keep your data to where like, oh, I'm really good at this. Look at the exercises of which you lift the least amount of weights. Like, hey, that's probably something to improve.
Yep. Well, and like with the beginners and accessory exercise selection, start out with basic bodybuilding movements. Basic tricep extensions, basic presses, basic, hamstring work, basic quad work. Start out with the basics, and an even balance of all the basics. And then after 8 to 10 weeks, you can start to see, well, I'm really good at the quad extension, but I'm not so good at the hamstring curl.
Yeah.
You can start to, at that point, see where your weak points are.
From your interactions working with complete novices up to pro athletes, but I guess we're back to trying to stay on topic with this. What's the biggest challenges you see with beginners?
They want to promote themselves to intermediate immediately. They want the most amount of variation. I think a lot of guys look at the way we train at Westside in the gym, and they want to train like that right off the bat. And it's just, when anybody started, I started very basic. I started with, basic powerlifting movements, pretty much the way I'm speaking today about the training methods is the type of training methods I used to get started. I didn't know it was conjugate at the time, but I would just lift heavy, and then I would have repeated effort days. I just think that too many folks get caught up in, well, I got to use bands and chains today. I got to use the giant cambered bar now, to where get the most out of the least now. It's a gift to be able to use just a small amount of variation and get a significant amount of improvement out of that. Once you get to a point, 20, 25 years in, it becomes difficult to find ways to become stronger or find ways to, rapidly improve. A beginner has the world in their palm in that aspect. So, you enjoy that benefit while you have it.
Yeah.
Don't run off into intermediate and advanced level shit right off the bat. Be happy to be a beginner and get the most out of being a beginner.
Another thing I've found is that people mix up intensity and density.
Yeah.
That when you first start, you have to recover. You're not in shape or you're not highly trained enough to recover from a highly dense workout with volume. Yeah. So your volume should start, even when new athletes come in here with a pretty high training age from other systems, we would have to train them to train to where they have to be slowly ramped up into the volume. Because if you go from an average volume of 12,000 pounds to 60,000 pounds, like that's a monumental jump, and the recovery is so hard. So when you start out in this, do not forget about recovery, and do not calculate your volume. Your total tonnage is very important to calculate, and slowly but surely increase that, because from month 1 to month 12, you might go from 5,000 pounds all the way up to 45,000 pounds. And that is a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And your body needs to, we're always chasing adaptation, we're avoiding accommodation. And intensity, yes, you should treat every workout, every exercise with maximal intent. You never want to rest on your laurels. You never want to be slow. You never want to just go with the flow. You want to give everything intent, but intensity and density are two very different things.
Well, and speaking toward density, with the beginner, the biggest thing between whether it's a main exercise or an accessory exercise is take the time to recover to ensure that the next set can be completed to standard every time. Yep. You don't want to be pushing density to the point that your quality of training is suffering. That's just asking to get hurt.
Yep.
So don't rush the process. I mean, max effort particularly, if it takes you, 3 to 5, 6 minutes, or if you're at the top set, you need, 7 or 8 minutes to recover. I mean, that might sound excessive, but if that's what you need to perform that top set to the best of your ability, do that, because it's at that point, it's not about the density. We're worried about the training intensity. Yep. We want to reach that 90 to, max effort level, focus on that. And then the density will just, it develops on its own.
Yeah.
Like with working with the athletes, like you probably experienced, even if they're new to lifting weights, they can generally handle a higher level of density because they come in with all that preconditioning work accomplished. They're preconditioned.
Well, and we have to get them educated on execution.
Yeah.
Back to technique. And that's a very good point, is that don't worry about time.
Yeah.
When you start off, like if it takes you an hour and a half, like you have to be in shape to do a workout in under 60 minutes.
Yep.
And in shape and have good execution of technique.
Mm-hmm.
Like my coaching philosophy is I'm not a perfectionist for technique. I want to get enough technique to where you're not going to get injured, but you get something from it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to stop everything just because maybe your upper back rounds over a little bit or you're stopping by 1 inch. This is with high level athletes. But as a beginner, if you give that leeway, then it's going to get bigger and bigger as you become more accomplished. So take the time to refine technique and don't rush. And then back intensity and density, you can be intense with every set and every rep. Give yourself enough recovery time.
Yep.
And you can use heart rate, you can use all these different things, but the simplest thing is technique.
Yep.
If your technique falters, give yourself more recovery time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the best way to evaluate whether you're taking enough rest between sets is how good is your technique set to set.
It's the biggest question. Like, should I take 1 minute? Should I take 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Like everyone, the most common answer we give is it depends, and it drives everyone fucking nuts.
Yeah.
But it really does. Context is king, depending on the athlete, and to where training age, all these things factor in. But technique and heart rate, the two of them are pretty standard.
Well, like what you said about technique. Well, what's optimal technique? Well, optimal technique is the technique that allows you to move the weight most efficiently without causing pain or injury. Yep. It's individual. There's no one size fits all technique. Just as there's no humans, are built the same. No, there's no two human beings. Unless maybe you're identical twins, I guess. But everybody's built a little different. So you might look at 10 squats and see, 10 different ways to squat to a small degree or maybe a large degree.
How do you have your athletes track their progress?
Well, I use TrueCoach, so they just update the training log, and that's the easiest way. But, I mean, if you're a new athlete, say you're not working with a coach, keep a log. It's that simple. I mean, that's pretty old school to have a training log. And it gives you, and that's what's nice about that is you can be in the gym and look back 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, and have the data right there.
I'm just to where I think initially I like the aspect, and we come from that generation of actually handwriting down stuff because it forces you to slow down and think what you've done.
Yep.
From there, Google Sheets, anything that can track all your accomplishments, your max efforts, your volume, everything, you need this data. If you're not tracking or keeping record, Louis was an anomaly in that he could remember everyone's lifts.
Yeah.
And I think they take that for granted to where he was like, well, this person does this and this. If you're in the gym, you have that luxury. Like, you might not forget, or you might forget your lifts. Louis did not. He was a walking, talking encyclopedia of every lift you did, every person in there. When you're a beginner, get into this, you should know your numbers off by heart. If someone asks you, what's your record on this, this, and this, you shouldn't go, I don't know.
Yeah.
It should all be in your head. That way there is no ambiguity. Everything is objective.
Well, not only that, having that data in your head at all times will drive your training. You'll know, last week I did 20s, I need to hit the 30s right now.
It kind of comes into the motivation. Is a great thing with this system is it's gold. Like, this is a goal-setting system. Once you get that initial data in, you have goals to break. I want to hit this PR. I want to break this PR in this accessory. It's teaching you actually how to optimally goal set. Because if you get greedy, you're not going to achieve your goals.
No.
Of which the biggest mistake people make is they make huge jumps.
Yep.
And to where as the weights get heavier, your jumps should get smaller until you have that high training age where you can afford through your central nervous system to take a bigger jump.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. I think with, like we were talking about the smaller jumps, when you're a beginner using max effort training, you're not going to have that many jumps to the point you get to your max set anyways. So take the smaller jumps, take as many small jumps as you can to get to the point where you have 4 to 6 sets leading up to maybe, set 7 or 8 being the max. And even if that's using 2.5 pound plates at times to make the jump, do that. Just get the set in, because ultimately at that point, it's not so much about the set's impact on your absolute strength. It's just getting a practice rep in. So you make sure that by the time you get to that max set, that you're prepared, that you have your technique dialed in, that you feel comfortable going for it.
And what we have done is Burley has written a series of base building blogs that are on our website for free. In the links below, you're going to see training guides that you can download at any time. That's going to give you a really good overview of squat, bench, and deadlift, along with some accessories and main movements to do. But that is roughly, I guess, the overview of how a new person will get into this. The Conjugate Club is one of the best places to go in and actually see programming, interact with the community, and we will eventually have a course on there that's going to help in the future. But to me, this is a good start. and keep the questions coming in. And of speaking about questions, I think we'll go into the last part of today's episode of actually answering the questions from listeners. Burley, I'll give this to you since you're closer to 40 than I am. What advice would you give someone in their 40s who is new to weight training and interested in starting with the concurrent and conjugate training methods? Are there beginner-friendly programs you recommend to help build a solid base of strength and muscle?
Well, aside from listening to this podcast and reading the base building articles and the starting conjugate articles, like Back to the Conjugate Club, the Back to Basics program is your best way to jump into it. I think a lot of guys get caught up in age and think that they're, incapable. 40 is not that old. And for the record, I'm 35. Yeah. So anyways, 40 is not that old unless you have, major injuries. And at that point, maybe take our training into your doctor and let the doctor read it over and make sure that you can, check with your doctor, make sure you can complete the training properly. But other than that, unless you have health issues or injury issues, jump into it. Don't sensibly jump into it. Just follow the instructions we gave here today, and you should be fine. The biggest thing with older guys is sleep, food, hydration, and then at that point too, with the availability of TRT, get your blood levels, get your blood checked, and see what's going on there, and that can make all the difference.
How can the conjugate method be adapted for the general population, especially for those who are not athletes but want to build muscle, increase strength, and improve speed and power? Can you outline a well-rounded program that includes strength work, hypertrophy, speed and power, jumps, and joint conditioning? I think this is a lot of people, when we talk about athletes and we talk about powerlifters and whatever the demographic is, it's not maybe directly obvious, but we have 7 different sports with our athletes right now, and we're able to tailor this. So it's a general training system. You can adapt it to whatever you want.
Yep.
So whatever your goals are, that's the most important thing. Define your objectives. If you don't have an objective, I want to put on muscle, well then where? Give yourself a number. I want to get stronger. Well, how stronger do you want to get? And then that way, the ends justify the means.
Yep, I agree.
And a well-rounded program, I think it's in your base building, it's in this podcast, it's in our Conjugate Club. And I go back, just don't forget anything outside of here, including what we're talking about, is our interpretation of the conjugate method. We learned, studied, and trained under Louis. So we're trying to promote the way he taught us to teach it. And other people have their interpretations, especially if they're not here. I'm not saying they're correct or incorrect, but give yourself a good baseline education of everything from here first. That will help you decipher through what's shit and what's not.
Well, like I said earlier, it's undeniable that as far as field research goes, in terms of the conjugate method, there's nobody that surpasses Louis.
No.
Not even close.
Yeah. And to where you got to give yourself 40 years.
Yeah.
And a gym full of like over 1,500 members. I don't know how many, over at least 160 world records broke.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to top that. And Louis devoted his life to the gym.
World-class strength coach, world-class powerlifter.
Yep. What techniques or accessory movements do you recommend for strengthening the bottom part of a lift, especially when using bands that increase load at the top but make the bottom lighter? So basically, let's go through what techniques or accessory movements do you recommend for strengthening the bottom of a bench?
Just don't use bands or chains. I mean, it's that easy. I mean, not to be arrogant. It's really that easy. Just remove the bands and chains and focus on just barbell weight only.
But you're talking about the future method in that question, to where like very rarely did I see you guys actually use reverse bands.
I hate reverse bands personally, just because it always seemed to mess up my technique, the way I like to lift. It probably, there is use cases for it. I think with geared lifters, because there is, I mean, as much as we don't know about the CNS, we can say safely that with the type of poundage as a geared lifter lifts, you have to become acclimated to that demand.
Yeah.
So I think for geared lifters, there is a lot of merit with the future method, because you can load up 1,300 pounds on your back and have a safety mechanism in place to make sure you don't kill yourself, but also feel that poundage. So that's important. But for beginners or intermediates or raw powerlifters, I really wouldn't worry too much about the future method.
I'll go back down to I learned a lot from Luke and from Travis Bell. Travis, they would do the future method if they weren't feeling it. So they would come in, normally they would take weights no matter what, but if they were sick or they were coming back from a meet, it was put in because they knew. I'm not saying it's an easy PR, but it was an easier PR to recover from.
Essentially a deload at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, I want to get a deload PR.
Yep.
But other than
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, we very rarely use, especially if you're a beginner, you should not be using reverse bands. Like, that's just a terrible idea.
Well, and not only that, then it becomes it's like a jungle gym. Let's see how much band we can put on, load up as much weight, get the videos out. We're going to look cool today. Until one of the bands fucking break, and then you're fucking dead.
I don't think people respect gravity and weight that well.
Well, they will when they're at the hospital.
How should dynamic lifts be performed in terms of speed and explosiveness? What cues and techniques can ensure that dynamic lifts are executed correctly and effectively? And go back down to, unless you're strong enough, you shouldn't be doing dynamic effort lifting, but let's just assume you've gone from complete novice into beginner, now you're in intermediate, bringing in dynamic effort methods. Can you back up to that question, Harold? So then, how should dynamic efforts be performed in terms of speed and explosiveness? Do you use tendos?
I have in the past, but I don't on a regular basis, no. I just, the way we've always done it in the gym, which I prefer, is just, I can eyeball it. Not saying I can eyeball the exact meters per second, but I know if I'm looking fast, I know if I'm looking slow. And, I think when you talk about the 0.8 meters per second target, I've always looked at it more of a spectrum that, it's, of course, some sets will be a little faster, some sets will be a little slower, but as long as you're not, going past, 0.5 meters per second and getting into like the heavier ranges of training, it'll all carry over. 0.8 meters per second is optimal, but we've always eyeballed it in the gym. I still eyeball it, and I find success with it. My athletes I work with eyeball it. They find success with it. The Tendo can be a great tool to use, but then at the same time, like we've discussed in the past, like Louis used to say, it starts to create a competition against the machine, and guys start to abandon technique because you're trying to meet a speed parameter, and then all of a sudden you're fucking hurt.
And it's context dependent. Like, I've wrote about this to where if you compare your speed to someone else's, it's terrible because you don't know how fast you are naturally compared to somebody else.
And this might make me a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes I think, is the fucking tool even calibrated correctly? Like, who's guaranteeing that I'm getting a correct reading?
Or who's using the tool?
Yeah.
Like, that comes down to sports science, to where you're usually only as accurate as the person using the device.
But what if the thing dropped out of my bag and hit the floor?
Yeah.
Is it damaged in a way that could potentially give a misreading? I mean,
I like them for pre and post. Like, to where if we're going to do pre and post maybe once or twice a year, that we have data on speed.
Yeah.
But it's never been, the only time it has hindered or has done anything to training, it's hindered someone's progress because I was a novice coach and I thought that they were slower than piss, and turns out I wasn't talking to the sports specific coach and they were crushing it, but it completely ruined training to where we were trying to beat a machine, and that's where Louis pulled me aside and basically said, like,
I mean, I'm not against having tools to collect data, but I don't know. Is it needed? Is it a luxury? Yes. Is it necessary? No.
Yeah, it should give you feedback, but it shouldn't dictate training.
And then I'll say another thing too. They have the apps that do it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust that for a fucking second. Not even a second. I mean, if you're going to trust your phone camera from a distance to judge how fast you're moving, horse shit. Now, if it's the Tendo unit that's, the string connected to the barbell, better chance that's an accurate reading. But even then, like I said, if it drops out of your bag and hits a concrete floor, did something rattle inside it and all of a sudden the readings are off? If I take a scale and drop it and clank it on the ground, is it going to weigh me correctly? Like, that's not guaranteed.
And let's go back to, if you're a beginner and you're getting into this, like, we've all fallen for this trap in whatever new demographic. Like, we got into archery. You go out and buy the best bow there is, the best arrows there is. Turns out they don't make you shoot any better. We've learned that the hard way, but to where it's the same thing. You can get all these bells and whistles and all these accessories and all these different training apparatuses and apps. It's not going to help give you the foundation you need.
Find some dude that's been doing it for 30 years, shows up with a recurve bow and hands you your ass, right?
Exactly. Like, your walls and your roof will thank you. What does an effective warm-up routine look like for different types of workouts, such as max effort, lower, upper, dynamic effort, lower and upper? Basically asking, like, what does a warm-up look like before each
I'll
day?
let you go first, because you could just review maybe how you warm up the athletes like you did today.
Yeah, to where vast majority of our warm-ups come straight from Lewis, where we do it with the actual bar and the movement. For some, especially if the athletes have aged and we have aged, I've realized the importance to at least activate and stimulate the joints. We do a lot of static band holds, banded warm-ups, reverse hypers, some light sleds, and some stretches, some dynamic stretches rather than static stretches. It does not take up a huge part of the time. We might take 5 to 10 minutes. We're getting more and more into, we're going to have a structure. Some people will get rolled out with body tempering. Everyone has their routine, but I at least want to ensure that the joints get stimulated and that I know that they can actually reach depth. Because some athletes, if they don't warm up correctly, it will be set 6 and they're starting to hit their grooves. We're like, oh, if we had hit this earlier on, we get way more out of it. But I never let it go over 15 minutes.
No, I agree. It's an individual thing. And like me personally, I usually just warm up with warm-up sets with whatever exercise I'm doing that day. But then if it's a lower body day, I might do some belt squat walks, some sled pulls, some hypers. Upper body days, some tricep press downs, some pull downs, some lateral raises. Then get to it. Nothing too crazy. I think the fads come and go on social media, and two of the biggest fads that seem to be regularly occurring is warm up shit and technique shit. Important to a degree, overemphasized likely.
And that's like bands are so simple. Just get in there, just do some. At the end of the day, you're just trying to get yourself in a state of heightened awareness. You can execute the exercise. You can actually feel the exercise. And then two, when you're strong, and I've seen it with all you guys, to where you're not going to get stimulated or anywhere until you actually put heavy weight in your back. So the warm-ups on that to where like it doesn't matter. I've seen the worst form ever with lighter weight, and as the weight got heavier, you guys' technique became immensely better.
Well, the stronger I am, I get to a point that I can't even, this is maybe not a feather in my cap, but I can't even squat 135 properly. I'll be falling over with 135.
Let me ask you that, to me, it's always a ratio, but when you're a 900 deadlifter, like...
I've been in the gym, never in competition. I have pulled it in the gym.
When you're
I don't want people thinking I'm out here stealing stats. No, I'm not like that.
When you're deadlifting 800 pounds and we're deadlifting 500 pounds, 600 pounds, do the jumps matter to where will you start at 135 or can you start at 225 or 315 compared to?
Well, a lot of times I'll start right at 315, but and that's also just energy conservation. Not so much that 135 or 225 is going to tire me out. I just like to get right to it, and then even from there, if it's a max effort day, I'll take as much as a 100-pound jump because I look at it like this: if the target top weight today is 825. And I'm, pull 725. We could put 765 or 800 on, but what a waste, right?
Yeah.
I'm strong enough to take that bigger jump, and then I'll just jump right to it and get the work done, not waste the energy. But when you're, a beginner, intermediate, smaller jumps are necessary.
Yeah.
It's all relevant. It's a nuanced thing based on the individual, right?
And that's to where when you start with smaller jumps, and then as you get a higher training age, which means you get more used to training, the bigger jumps will come. And I think that's people make too big of jumps or they forget. We've had it here where we've had people who, not the athletes, but we've had coaches come in who will do set 1, 2, and 3. They'll jump over set 4, 5, and 6 and go straight to 7. And to where there's a lot of benefit from those sets leading up in terms of volume, in terms of getting that weight on your back or in your hands.
Yeah, I mean, it's still accrued volume. It counts. It counts for something. It's not like it's a total waste. And this may be something we should have mentioned during the max effort, but we don't miss. We do not want to miss. So don't be taking gamble jumps that are putting you in that realm of potentially missing or a high chance that you're going to miss. Don't. Max effort, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced lifter, is not the place to gamble.
What's the name of that book? Greedy Baby, Hungry Baby?
Greedy Baby, Sad Baby.
Greedy Baby, Sad Baby. This is where people can get greedy and make too big of jumps. But don't forget the actual mental aspect of missing all the time will eventually make you a loser. Because you're setting goals to where these are goals that you are setting. And if you don't stick to that or give yourself goals to achieve, all you're going to achieve is failure. And I just can never get my head around that to where you want to get a 5-pound PR, get out. Don't make these huge jumps all the time and I always do your last one to failure. Because then that's all you're used to is failing on your last set.
Yeah, but I mean, simply put, greed will lead you to burnout or injury pretty quick.
Can you clarify the approach to rotating main exercises in a training program?
I mean, we kind of went over that today. Get the most out of the least, right? The greatest amount of adaptation out of the least amount of variation. It's always going to depend on the level of the athlete. Beginners can use less variation. Advanced athletes might need a little bit more variation. I will say this, though. Even if you're an advanced lifter, once you're 10 to 12 weeks out from competition, max effort work, you got 4 sessions a month, upper and lower, so it's a total of 8 sessions for upper and lower. 2 of the upper sessions, 2 of the lower sessions need to be competition relevant movements, and then the other 2 need to be relevant, weakness relevant, right?
Yep.
To address an identified weakness. But you never want to get so far off into the weeds that your weakness relevant or your other 2 variations are insane, reverse band, all sorts of shit. Just be sensible. I don't. It's the hardest thing to convey to people, but be sensible.
Yeah, and don't
You
rush.
see people make fun of us online, and they'll attach a bunch of bands and chains and make up the most ridiculous variations. I've trained in the gym for a long time. I've never seen us do a variation where I could consider it fucking asinine.
Yeah.
Like, it always made sense. So I don't understand where that comes from. But yeah, I mean, just be sensible with your variations. I'm not saying don't have an idea that, maybe this will work. And I'm not saying don't try something that maybe your band setup or your chain setup could work, but keep the shit sensible and you'll get the best results.
How should the conjugate method be modified if the main goal is hypertrophy and gaining as much muscle as possible naturally? Well, from what I've seen from people who are in the bodybuilding community and do use our system, the biggest variations I have seen is after the max effort movements, they will do drop sets, and the vast majority of this is achieved via the accessory work. The accessory, basically sets and reps, are tailored to that, and they emphasize a lot more on the eccentric portion than they do in the concentric portion. But it's been specific and been contextual to where reach out to a bodybuilder who does this. I know John Quince, Seth Shaw, Marcus Perry, like all these people have their variants of how they implement stuff from here in their own system. But to me, it's all in the accessories, and eccentrically, the eccentric aspect is usually what tears most of the muscle.
Well, and even with powerlifters, Lou had us do drop sets, and he was always wanting us to focus on hypertrophy because you know how Lou was? Lou was big on physical composition. He couldn't stand, I mean, not saying any of us were bodybuilders whatsoever, but he couldn't stand, just sloppy, fat, out of shape looking powerlifters. Like, it would piss him off. You remember that one year he came in and was like demanding everybody gets on a damn diet and all this sorts of shit. And he was right. I mean, like he said, it brings a bad appearance on the gym if we aren't reflecting the methods properly and looking in shape like you should as a powerlifter. So even for powerlifters, we still focus on gaining muscle. We're not trying to be fat fucks that can lift a lot. You want to look like you lift too, right?
What level of strength development should one have before implementing max effort lifts as described in the conjugate method? Are there specific benchmarks for lifts like the bench press, squat, and deadlifts? I think we've covered a lot of that in the start of it. Do you have anything to add to that?
Like I said, we kind of obviously went over we went over the parameters of how to introduce it. The book of methods is going to describe how we use it in the gym for our lifters. So, of course, there's tons of merit in that information, but I would follow the more, I guess it's the slower approach we described, the more, the safer approach. But once again, it's pretty simple. It's not, guys make such a big deal out of that. They act like it's life and death. You're lifting up to a point that the weight gets heavy enough to where technique breaks down slightly and you shut the workout down. It's not a gun to your head. You know what I mean? Like, you're not risking death. You're not in a dangerous, the athlete or the coach is in charge of the exposure to danger.
Yep.
Just know when to shut it down. Pretty easy.
I think that's a good point to stop today's episode. Anyone who's got questions, please put them in the comments below. If you're listening to this, just send us an email. If you can, like, subscribe, spread the word. This is the Westside Barbell Podcast, Burley. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
See you guys next time.